In the winter of 1848, 67 medical students vanished from Riverside Medical Academy in Cedar Falls, Iowa, and their bodies were never recovered. The official records claim they died from a cholera outbreak, but no graves were ever dug, no funeral services held, and no families were notified. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. What the Academy desperately concealed for over a century was far more sinister than any plague. These students didn't die from disease. They became the disease. Every one of those missing souls had last been seen entering the basement surgical theater of Riverside Medical Academy, where the screams echoed through the night, even when no official procedures were scheduled. The sound of bone saws never stopped, running day and night, cutting through more than just cadavers. Now let me take you back to that cursed winter when medical education meant something far different than healing. The first snow had already blanketed Cedar Falls when young Margaret Thompson made her discovery. A discovery that would expose the most horrific secret in American medical history. Cedar Falls embodied everything hopeful about the American frontier in the 1840s. Nestled along the Cedar River in northeastern Iowa, it boasted a growing population of nearly 1,500 souls. Farmers, merchants, craftsmen, and their families had carved out prosperity from the rich prairie soil and abundant timber along the riverbanks. Main Street stretched for 6 blocks, lined with sturdy brick buildings that housed everything from Fletcher's General store to Morrison's banking house. The Presbyterian Church stood at the town's heart, its bell tower visible for miles across the rolling prairie. Every Sunday morning, those bronze notes called the faithful to worship, the sound carrying on winds that smelled of fresh earth and distant rain. The town's pride was its progressive institutions. Cedar Falls Academy for Young Ladies, established in 1843, drew students from as far as Chicago. The Cedar Falls Gazette, published weekly, kept residents informed of both local happenings and distant political developments. Most importantly, there was Riverside Medical Academy, founded in 1845 by Dr. Nathaniel Blackwood. The imposing 3-story brick structure sat on a bluff overlooking the Cedar River, its Gothic Revival architecture lending it an air of scholarly authority. Gas lamps illuminated its windows late into the night, and the building hummed with the activity of serious medical education. Dr. Blackwood had studied at Harvard Medical School before venturing west to establish what he promised would become the finest medical institution between Boston and San Francisco. His vision attracted ambitious young men from across the territory, eager to learn the healing arts on the American frontier. The Academy's curriculum was revolutionary for its time, emphasizing practical experience alongside theoretical knowledge. Students didn't just read about anatomy. They dissected actual human specimens. They didn't merely study surgical techniques from textbooks. They practiced on real patients under careful supervision, or so the official brochures claimed. The Academy's reputation grew quickly throughout the territory. Graduates found positions in hospitals and private practices from Minnesota to Missouri. Local families felt fortunate to have such skilled physicians nearby. When someone fell ill or suffered an injury, Dr. Blackwood and his students provided care that surpassed anything available for hundreds of miles. The tuition was steep, $300 per year, but families sacrificed to send their sons to Riverside. The investment seemed worthwhile when graduates established successful practices and became pillars of their communities. Margaret Thompson had arrived in Cedar Falls in the autumn of 1848 to serve as head nurse at the Academy's medical clinic. At 26, she possessed more practical medical experience than many physicians twice her age. She had trained at Philadelphia General Hospital, where she learned to assist in complex surgeries and manage the care of dozens of patients simultaneously. Dr. Blackwood had recruited her personally, traveling to Philadelphia with promises of independence and authority she could never achieve in the established medical institutions of the East. In Cedar Falls, she would oversee all nursing staff, develop training protocols, and work directly with medical students to ensure they understood patient care beyond mere surgical technique. Margaret was a woman of remarkable composure and intelligence. Standing just over 5 feet tall, with auburn hair always pinned severely back and gray eyes that missed nothing, she commanded respect through competence rather than intimidation. She spoke 4 languages fluently and had read extensively in medical literature from Europe and America. Her references from Philadelphia described her as exceptionally skilled and absolutely reliable. The academy impressed her immediately. The main building housed lecture halls equipped with the latest teaching equipment, including anatomical models imported from Germany, and a surgical amphitheater with tiered seating for 100 observers. The library contained over 2,000 medical texts, many acquired directly from European universities. Student dormitories occupied the 2nd and 3rd floors, with rooms for 80 students. Each room was furnished simply but adequately, with a bed, desk, washstand, and wardrobe. Gas lighting illuminated every room, and steam heating kept the building comfortable even during Iowa's harsh winters. The basement level contained the practical training facilities that set Riverside apart from other medical schools. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Here, students learned anatomy through direct examination of human specimens. They practiced surgical techniques under Dr. Blackwood's guidance, developing the manual skills essential for competent medical practice. The basement also housed the Academy's medical clinic, where local residents could receive treatment from advanced students under faculty supervision. Dr. Blackwood was a man of imposing presence and unquestionable authority. Tall and lean, with prematurely silver hair and penetrating blue eyes, he commanded attention whenever he entered a room. His lectures drew students from across the building, even those not enrolled in his courses. He spoke with the passion of a true believer in medical progress, frequently declaring that they stood on the threshold of a new age in healing. Medicine was advancing rapidly in the middle of the 19th century. Anesthesia had been discovered just 2 years earlier, revolutionizing surgical practice. Understanding of disease transmission was improving, though germ theory remained controversial. Medical schools across America were updating their curricula to reflect these advances, but none more aggressively than Riverside. Dr. Blackwood insisted that his students master the latest techniques and theories. He corresponded regularly with physicians in Boston, New York, and even London, ensuring that Riverside remained current with medical developments worldwide. Students appreciated this commitment to excellence, even when it demanded long hours and intensive study. The Academy's assistant faculty included Dr. Charles Morrison, who specialized in surgical techniques, and Dr. Edward Walsh, whose expertise lay in internal medicine and diagnosis. Both men had trained at established Eastern medical schools before accepting positions at Riverside. They shared Dr. Blackwood's vision of advancing medical education on the frontier. Margaret's initial months at the academy proceeded smoothly. She established efficient procedures for patient care in the clinic, trained a staff of local women to assist with nursing duties, and developed educational materials to help medical students understand the practical aspects of patient treatment. Her work earned praise from both faculty and students. The student body impressed her with their dedication and intelligence. Most came from respectable families willing to invest significantly in their sons' education. They studied diligently, asked thoughtful questions, and approached their practical training with appropriate seriousness. Many had already completed undergraduate education at colleges in Iowa, Illinois, or Ohio before enrolling at Riverside. Among the students, several stood out for their exceptional ability. James Patterson from Burlington, demonstrated remarkable skill in surgical procedures. Robert Chun, whose family had emigrated from China, brought unique perspectives on medical treatment that fascinated his classmates. Samuel Brooks, the son of a Methodist minister, combined deep compassion for patients with rigorous scientific thinking. The Academy's relationship with the Cedar Falls community was generally positive. Local residents appreciated having access to modern medical care, and many families had personal connections to the institution through students or faculty. The Academy provided employment for dozens of local people, from kitchen staff to groundskeepers, contributing significantly to the town's economy. However, Margaret began noticing subtle signs that troubled her professional instincts. Students occasionally appeared in the clinic with minor injuries they attributed to accidents during practical training sessions. The injuries were always superficial, cuts or bruises that healed quickly with basic treatment. When she asked for details about how these accidents occurred, students provided vague explanations about equipment malfunctions or clumsiness during procedures. More concerning was the basement surgical theater's activity schedule. According to official records, practical training sessions occurred 3 afternoons per week and 2 evenings. But Margaret frequently heard sounds from the basement during unscheduled hours. The distinctive whine of bone saws, the clank of surgical instruments, and occasionally, sounds that resembled human voices in distress. When she mentioned these observations to Dr. Blackwood, he explained that advanced students often requested additional practice time to perfect their techniques. The Academy encouraged such dedication by providing access to facilities during evening hours. The sounds she heard simply reflected the intensive nature of proper medical education. Margaret accepted this explanation initially, but her concerns deepened as autumn progressed into winter. Students who participated in evening training sessions often appeared exhausted the following day, as if they had endured significant physical or emotional stress. Some developed nervous habits like trembling hands or inability to maintain eye contact during conversations. The change was most noticeable in the Academy's most promising students. James Patterson, previously confident and outgoing, became withdrawn and anxious. He avoided conversations about his training experiences and frequently appeared distracted during routine clinic duties. Robert Chun developed an alarming tendency to flinch whenever anyone approached him unexpectedly, and his academic performance declined noticeably. Samuel Brooks underwent the most dramatic transformation. The compassionate young man who had impressed everyone with his bedside manner became cold and clinical in his patient interactions. He spoke of medical procedures in mechanical terms, as if human suffering was merely an intellectual problem to be solved through proper technique. Margaret's nursing experience had taught her to recognize signs of psychological trauma. These students exhibited symptoms consistent with individuals who had witnessed or experienced severe violence. But medical training, however intensive, should not produce such profound distress. Something was happening in those basement training sessions that went far beyond standard educational practice. Her attempts to investigate were consistently frustrated. The basement surgical theater was kept locked when not in official use, and only faculty members possessed keys. Students who participated in evening sessions were reluctant to discuss their experiences in detail. When pressed, they provided descriptions of routine procedures that didn't explain their obvious distress. Margaret's opportunity came sooner than expected. On New Year's Day, 1849, a massive blizzard struck Cedar Falls with unprecedented fury. Winds howled across the prairie at speeds that uprooted century-old oak trees and tore roofs from buildings throughout the town. The storm knocked down telegraph lines, blocked roads with snowdrifts 15 feet high, and plunged the entire region into complete isolation from the outside world. The Academy's heating system struggled against the brutal cold. Dr. Blackwood announced that all classes would be suspended until the weather improved, and ordered most students to remain in their dormitory rooms to conserve fuel. The skeleton staff maintaining essential operations included only Margaret and 2 kitchen workers who lived nearby. Faculty members retreated to their private quarters in the administration wing, leaving the main building largely empty. Margaret realized this presented the perfect chance to explore areas normally off-limits to nursing staff. The storm provided cover for her investigation, and the reduced personnel meant fewer people would notice her movements throughout the building. She had studied the academy's layout carefully over the past months, identifying possible entry points to the basement surgical theater. Late that evening, as wind rattled windows and snow continued falling in sheets, Margaret made her way through darkened corridors toward the basement stairs. She carried a small oil lamp turned down low, its flame barely illuminating the path. Ahead, the building creaked and groaned around her, sounds that normally indicated settling wood and shifting foundations, but tonight seemed almost like warnings. The basement corridor was colder than the upper floors, with a dampness that penetrated clothing and chilled bone. Margaret's breath formed clouds in the frigid air as she approached the heavy oak door that led to the surgical theater. As expected, it was locked, but she had come prepared. During her years in Philadelphia, she had learned various practical skills from hospital maintenance staff, including basic lock picking. The lock was substantial, but not complex. Margaret worked carefully with tools improvised from hairpins and a thin knife blade, grateful for the storm's noise that masked any sounds her efforts might produce. After 20 minutes of patient manipulation, she heard the satisfying click of tumblers falling into place. The door swung open silently on well-oiled hinges. The surgical theater was larger than she had imagined from exterior observations. Tiered seating surrounded a central operating area, with gas fixtures providing bright illumination when needed. The space could accommodate perhaps 60 observers during formal demonstrations. Medical equipment lined the walls, including surgical instruments she recognized and others whose purposes remained mysterious. What immediately caught Margaret's attention was the cleanliness of everything. Every surface gleamed as if recently scrubbed, every instrument polished to mirror brightness. The smell of carbolic acid hung heavy in the air, mixed with something else she couldn't immediately identify. Something organic and slightly sweet that reminded her of the dissection rooms in medical schools, but more intense. The operating table dominated the center of the theater. It was an elaborate mechanism, adjustable for height and angle, with leather restraints at strategic points. Margaret had seen similar tables in major hospitals, but this one included modifications that seemed excessive for typical surgical procedures. Additional restraints, positioning devices, and drainage channels that suggested operations far more complex than standard medical training would require. Surrounding the operating table were wheeled carts containing surgical instruments arranged with military precision. Margaret recognized standard scalpels, forceps, and clamps, but other tools defied easy categorization. Some appeared designed for procedures she couldn't imagine, with curved blades and unusual gripping surfaces that seemed more suited to mechanical work than medical treatment. Along one wall stood glass cabinets containing specimens preserved in clear fluid. Margaret approached these displays with professional curiosity, expecting to find the anatomical samples common in medical education. What she discovered instead made her stomach clench with horror. The specimens were human organs, but not the typical examples used for teaching purposes. These organs showed signs of surgical intervention while still functioning. Hearts with artificial valves that appeared to have been implanted in living subjects. Lungs with foreign tubes and devices that could only have been inserted during active breathing. Kidneys connected to mechanical filtration systems that suggested experimental procedures on conscious patients. Margaret's medical training allowed her to understand the implications of what she was seeing. These specimens came from living human beings who had undergone experimental surgery. The precision of the preservation suggested the organs had been removed immediately after the procedures, while they were still warm and functioning normally. She moved deeper into the theater, her lamp casting dancing shadows that seemed to move independently of her motion. Behind the main operating area, she discovered additional rooms that served specialized purposes. One contained what appeared to be recovery beds, but with restraints that would prevent any movement by patients. Another room housed elaborate monitoring equipment designed to track vital signs during extended procedures. The most disturbing discovery was a room filled with detailed charts and diagrams. These documents recorded systematic experiments on human subjects with notes written in Dr. Blackwood's distinctive handwriting. The charts tracked the effects of various surgical procedures, drug treatments, and physical manipulations on living patients. Each subject was identified only by number, but the level of detail suggested prolonged observation periods. Margaret studied these records with growing horror. The experiments described procedures that no ethical physician would consider performing on any living creature, let alone human beings. Subjects had been subjected to deliberate infections to study disease progression. Others had undergone surgical removal of organs to determine how long they could survive with reduced function. Most shocking were experiments that appeared designed to test the limits of human consciousness during surgical procedures. Detailed notes described performing operations on fully conscious subjects, monitoring their responses to pain, fear, and physical trauma. The documentation was thorough and dispassionate, as if the researchers viewed their subjects as laboratory animals rather than human beings. As Margaret continued reading, she began to understand the Academy's true purpose. Riverside Medical Academy was not simply providing advanced medical education. It was conducting systematic human experimentation under the cover of student training. The missing students had not withdrawn from the program. They had become unwilling subjects in Dr. Blackwood's research. The experimental protocols revealed a progression that explained what Margaret had observed over the past months. New students initially participated as observers, watching procedures performed on kidnapped vagrants and travelers who would not be missed. Gradually, they were required to assist with increasingly horrific experiments, their participation ensuring their silence through complicity. Students who showed reluctance or moral qualms became subjects themselves. Their familiarity with the Academy's routine made them easy to control, and their medical knowledge allowed researchers to use them for more sophisticated experiments. The missing students had not left the Academy. Their remains were preserved in those glass cabinets, their organs providing specimens for ongoing research. Margaret discovered evidence that the human experimentation had been continuing for over 3 years. Hundreds of people had disappeared, their disappearances attributed to the harsh frontier conditions or natural dangers of traveling through unsettled territory. The Academy's isolated location and respected reputation provided perfect cover for activities that would have caused outrage in more populated areas. The storm continued raging outside, but Margaret barely noticed the wind and snow. She was completely absorbed in documenting the evidence of systematic murder and torture. Her nursing experience had exposed her to human suffering, but nothing had prepared her for the calculated cruelty revealed in these records. Dr. Blackwood and his colleagues had corrupted medical science for purposes that defied comprehension. As she photographed documents and made notes about the specimens, Margaret began to understand the broader implications of her discovery. This was not simply a case of criminal behavior by a few individuals. The experimental program appeared to be connected to larger medical institutions in the East. Correspondence mentioned funding from unnamed benefactors and coordination with researchers at established universities. The scope of the conspiracy suggested that human experimentation was occurring at multiple locations across the country. Riverside Academy was part of a network of institutions conducting research that official medical ethics would never permit. The frontier provided an ideal environment for such activities, with sparse population and limited government oversight. Margaret also discovered evidence that the experimental program was accelerating. Recent documents indicated plans to expand operations significantly, with new funding allowing for larger numbers of subjects and more ambitious research projects. The missing 67 students represented just the beginning of what was planned for the coming year. As dawn approached and the storm began to subside, Margaret realized she faced an impossible situation. The evidence she had discovered proved systematic murder and torture, but the perpetrators held positions of authority and respect in the community. Local law enforcement would likely dismiss her accusations as hysteria, especially given her status as a woman in a male-dominated profession. Moreover, she now understood that her own position at the academy was precarious. Her investigations had not gone unnoticed, and Dr. Blackwood had already expressed displeasure with her curiosity about basement activities. If she remained at Riverside much longer, she would likely join the missing students as an experimental subject. Margaret spent the remaining hours before sunrise carefully, replacing documents and cleaning any traces of her presence in the surgical theater. She returned to her room with a complete understanding of the horrors happening beneath the academy's respectable front. But she had no clear plan for exposing the truth or stopping the ongoing terrible acts. The blizzard had ended by morning, leaving Cedar Falls buried under several feet of snow, but bringing back communication with the outside world. Margaret knew she had little time before normal operations started again, and her unusual behavior during the storm might be discovered. She needed to find allies who would believe her story and have the authority to investigate her claims. Her first thought was to contact medical colleagues in Philadelphia, who knew her reputation and would trust her professional judgment. But letters would take weeks, and the experimental program would continue claiming victims during that time. She also thought about talking to local church leaders, but Dr. Blackwood had too much respect in the town. Any requests for help would likely fail. As Margaret got ready for another day of doing her normal work while making her next plans, she did not know that someone had seen her midnight search. Someone else at the school knew about what she was doing. This person had their own reasons for watching the basement surgery room. The game of lies that had kept Riverside secrets safe for 3 years was about to become much more dangerous. Margaret Thompson had made herself a target without knowing it. The plot reached far beyond the Iowa border. The person watching Margaret was Samuel Brooks. He was the minister's son whose change had worried her deeply. Unlike the other students, who had become willing helpers or unwilling victims, Samuel had kept enough of his good judgment to see the true horror of what was happening at Riverside Academy. For weeks, he had been writing down the terrible acts while looking for a way to expose them without becoming another victim. Samuel had seen Margaret's growing doubt and her tries to look into the basement work. On the night of the big storm, he had followed her down to the surgery room. He stayed hidden while she found the proof that confirmed his worst fears. He knew that her search had put her in direct danger. He also knew that she was his best hope for stopping the nightmare that Riverside had become. 3 days after the storm, Samuel came up to Margaret in the school's library during her lunch break. The room was empty except for them. Most students had left for classes or hands-on training. Samuel picked a table in the far corner, away from windows and doors. Then he spoke in a voice just above a whisper. "Miss Thompson, I know what you found in the basement," he said. His hands shook a little as he spoke. "I know because I have been writing down everything for months. Dr. Blackwood and his workers are planning something terrible. We may be the only people who can stop them." Margaret looked at the young man's face. She saw the haunted look that had replaced his former kindness. His eyes kept moving toward the library door. She noticed that he sat where he could see anyone coming to their table. The change from confident student to scared witness was complete. "What exactly have you written down?" Margaret asked carefully. She was not sure if Samuel could be trusted. This might be some trick designed by Dr. Blackwood to test how loyal she was. Samuel reached into his coat and pulled out a leather journal. Its pages were filled with detailed writing and rough drawings. Everything, he replied. Names, dates, procedures, places where they got subjects. I have been keeping this record since I realized what they were actually doing during those evening training sessions. The journal had information that added to what Margaret had found in the surgery room. Samuel had written down the names of missing people from across Iowa and nearby areas. These were people whose disappearances had been blamed on natural causes or criminal activity, but they had actually been kidnapped to serve as test subjects. The size of the operation was far larger than Margaret had imagined. Teams of school workers traveled throughout the region. They found suitable victims and arranged their capture. Travelers, immigrants, and social outcasts were preferred targets. Their disappearances would create minimal investigation. The school kept holding areas in abandoned buildings throughout Cedar Falls. This allowed them to keep subjects for long periods before using them in experiments. Samuel's notes showed that the medical testing served multiple purposes beyond simple research. Dr. Blackwood was developing techniques for battlefield surgery. Military officials had asked for this through unofficial channels. The Mexican War had shown problems in military medical care. Certain government officials were willing to support unethical research that might improve treatment for wounded soldiers. Also, the experiments were producing medical innovations. Dr. Blackwood sold these to drug companies and medical equipment makers. New surgery tools, drug recipes, and treatment methods developed through human testing generated large profits. These profits funded continued research. The school operated as both an educational institution and a commercial research business. The worst part, Samuel continued, his voice breaking slightly, is what they plan to do next week. They have been preparing for months. I think it involves all the remaining students. Margaret felt her blood turn cold. What kind of preparation? Samuel opened his journal to a page covered with diagrams and notes. Mass testing. They have been testing procedures on individual subjects, but now they want to study group responses to various treatments. They plan to use the entire student body as subjects in coordinated experiments designed to test the limits of human endurance and survival. The plan, as Samuel described it, involved dividing the remaining students into groups. Each group would face different experimental conditions. Some would undergo surgery procedures without pain medicine to study pain responses. Others would be infected with various diseases to observe progression and transmission. A control group would receive torture designed to break psychological resistance and measure the effects on physical health. Dr. Blackwood had convinced several students to participate willingly by promising them special recognition and advanced training opportunities. These students would serve as assistants in the experiments. Their participation would ensure their silence afterward. Samuel had been selected for this group, which was how he learned about the planned mass testing. When is this supposed to happen? Margaret asked, though she dreaded the answer. January 15th. Next week. They are bringing in additional physicians from other institutions to observe and participate. This is supposed to be a demonstration of their research capabilities for potential new funding sources. Margaret realized they had less than a week to prevent a massacre that would be worse than anything that had occurred at Riverside previously. The planned experiments would kill dozens of people while providing Dr. Blackwood with the credibility and resources to expand his operations. Nationally, we need to contact the authorities immediately, Margaret said. This evidence should be sufficient to warrant investigation. Samuel shook his head grimly. I have already tried. The local sheriff is Dr. Blackwood's brother-in-law. The mayor receives substantial donations from the academy. Even the circuit judge has financial interests in the institution. Anyone with authority in Cedar Falls either benefits from the academy's presence or depends on Dr. Blackwood's goodwill. The corruption extended beyond simple financial relationships. Samuel had discovered that several local officials had family members who had received treatment at the academy's clinic. This created personal debts of gratitude that Dr. Blackwood exploited to maintain their silence. Others had been compromised through evidence of their own misconduct that the Academy had obtained through careful investigation. Then we contact authorities outside Cedar Falls, Margaret suggested. The territorial government in Iowa City, or federal officials in Washington. With what proof? Samuel replied. Our testimony would be dismissed as hysteria or revenge against a respected institution. The physical evidence in the basement can be removed or explained as legitimate medical training materials. Dr. Blackwood has connections throughout the medical establishment who would support his reputation against our accusations. Margaret began to understand the sophistication of the conspiracy they were confronting. Dr. Blackwood had not simply established a criminal enterprise. He had created a network of complicity and corruption that protected his activities through multiple layers of deniability and misdirection. Exposing the truth would require more than evidence. It would require dismantling an entire system of protection and cover-up. There is one possibility, Samuel said after a long pause. Dr. Morrison has been expressing concerns about the direction of the research. I think he might be willing to help us if we approached him carefully. Dr. Charles Morrison was the Academy's specialist in surgical techniques, a man Margaret had observed to be more conventionally ethical than his colleagues. He participated in the experimental program, but seemed uncomfortable with its more extreme aspects. If they could convince him to support their efforts, his testimony would carry weight that theirs alone could not. That's extremely dangerous, Margaret pointed out. If Dr. Morrison reports our approach to Dr. Blackwood, we'll both disappear before we can take any further action. True, but it may be our only option. We can't stop this alone, and we're running out of time. Margaret studied Samuel's journal more carefully, noting the meticulous detail with which he had documented the Academy's crimes. His evidence complemented her own discoveries perfectly, providing a comprehensive picture of systematic murder and torture that continued over several years. Together, their documentation might convince someone in authority to investigate if they could find the right person to approach. Before we risk contacting Dr. Morrison, let's try one more avenue, Margaret suggested. I have colleagues in Philadelphia who know my professional reputation. If I can get a telegram to Dr. Williams at Philadelphia General Hospital, he might be able to mobilize federal health officials to investigate. Samuel nodded agreement. The telegraph office is in town, away from Academy property. If we can get there without being observed, we might be able to send messages before anyone realizes what we're doing. They spent the remainder of their meeting planning their approach to the telegraph office and composing messages that would convey the urgency of their situation without sounding like the ravings of delusional individuals. The messages needed to be credible enough to prompt immediate action, while brief enough to avoid detailed questions that might delay response. As they prepared to leave the library, Samuel grabbed Margaret's arm. There's something else you need to know. Last night, I overheard Dr. Blackwood talking with Dr. Walsh about you specifically. They know you've been investigating, and they're planning to include you in next week's experiments. You've become a liability they intend to eliminate. Margaret felt the walls of the Academy closing around her like a trap. Her investigation had not only revealed the truth about Riverside's activities, but it also marked her for death. The next few days would determine whether she could expose the conspiracy before becoming another victim of Dr. Blackwood's insatiable appetite for human experimentation. The revelation that her time was running out forced Margaret to confront the reality that conventional approaches to stopping the Academy's activities were insufficient. If legal authorities couldn't or wouldn't act, and if medical colleagues were too distant to provide immediate help, then she and Samuel would need to find other means of preventing the planned mass murder. As they left the library separately, to avoid suspicion, Margaret realized that their investigation had moved beyond simple evidence gathering. They were now engaged in a desperate race against time. with the lives of dozens of innocent people hanging in the balance and their own survival depending on their ability to outmaneuver opponents who controlled every aspect of their environment. Dr. Blackwood discouraged her interest in the basement training program, suggesting that nursing staff had no need to understand the complexities of advanced surgical education. He reminded her that her responsibilities focused on patient care in the clinic, not oversight of student training activities. His tone remained polite, but Margaret detected an underlying firmness that warned against further inquiries. As December arrived with its first serious snowfall, Margaret noticed that several students had stopped attending regular classes. According to official records, they had withdrawn from the academy for personal or financial reasons, but their disappearances seemed sudden and unexplained. These were dedicated students who had invested considerable time and money in their education. It seemed unlikely that they would abandon their studies so close to completing their degrees. The missing students included some of the most promising members of the class. David Mitchell, who had demonstrated exceptional diagnostic skills, simply vanished one morning without collecting his belongings or saying goodbye to friends. Thomas Wright, known for his meticulous attention to detail in laboratory work, disappeared similarly. When Margaret asked about these departures, faculty members provided brief explanations about family emergencies or financial difficulties that required immediate attention. Margaret began keeping careful records of these disappearances, noting dates, circumstances, and any unusual patterns she observed. By Christmas, 12 students had withdrawn from the academy under mysterious circumstances. All had been selected for advanced training in the basement surgical theater. All had displayed signs of increasing psychological distress before their departure. The winter of 1848 was particularly severe, with temperatures remaining below freezing for weeks at a time. Snow accumulated to depths that made travel difficult, effectively isolating Cedar Falls from the outside world. Mail delivery became sporadic, and few visitors arrived at the academy. The isolation seemed to intensify whatever was happening. In the basement training program, Margaret decided that she could no longer ignore her growing suspicions. Something at Riverside Medical Academy was fundamentally wrong, something that threatened both students and patients. Her professional obligations as a nurse demanded that she investigate further, regardless of the personal risks involved. The question was how to proceed when the Academy's administration clearly wanted to keep the basement activities secret. On Christmas Eve, 1848, as snow continued falling outside the Academy's Gothic windows, Margaret Thompson made a decision that would change everything. She would find a way into that locked basement surgical theater and discover the truth about what Dr. Blackwood and his colleagues were really teaching their students. What she would find there would challenge everything she believed about medicine, education, and human nature itself. Margaret and Samuel's attempt to reach the telegraph office that evening ended in disaster. As they approached the main entrance of the academy, intending to slip out under cover of darkness, they found Dr. Blackwood waiting for them in the foyer. His tall frame was silhouetted against the gaslighting, and his penetrating blue eyes held an expression of cold satisfaction. "Miss Thompson, Mr. Brooks," he said in his measured tone, "I believe you have something that belongs to the academy." Before either could respond, two burly men emerged from the shadows behind Dr. Blackwood. Margaret recognized them as groundskeepers who had worked at the academy since its founding, but their current demeanor suggested duties far beyond maintaining gardens and buildings. Their hands rested casually on clubs hanging from their belts, and their eyes held the flat emptiness of men accustomed to violence. "Your investigation has been admirable in its thoroughness," Dr. Blackwood continued, stepping closer to Margaret and Samuel, "but ultimately futile. Did you really believe that an institution of this sophistication would lack adequate security measures?" Samuel's hand moved instinctively toward the journal hidden beneath his coat, but one of the groundskeepers stepped forward with a warning shake of his head. The young man's face went pale as he realized their careful planning had been anticipated and countered. Dr. Blackwood extended his hand toward Samuel. "The journal, if you please. Your documentation efforts have been noted and appreciated, but they serve no useful purpose now." With obvious reluctance, Samuel withdrew the leather-bound book and handed it to Dr. Blackwood. The physician leafed through its pages with apparent interest, occasionally nodding as if impressed by the quality of Samuel's observations. "Excellent detail work," Dr. Blackwood remarked. "Your ministerial upbringing clearly emphasized careful record-keeping. These notes will actually prove quite useful for our own documentation purposes." Margaret found her voice despite the fear constricting her throat. "You cannot simply continue murdering people indefinitely. Someone will eventually investigate your activities here." Dr. Blackwood's smile held no warmth. "My dear Miss Thompson, you dramatically underestimate the scope and protection of our enterprise. Riverside Academy operates with the full knowledge and support of individuals whose authority extends far beyond this frontier territory." He gestured for them to follow him toward the basement stairs, the groundskeepers falling into position behind them to discourage any thoughts of escape. As they descended into the lower levels of the building, Dr. Blackwood continued his explanation in the tone of a professor delivering a lecture. "Medical science stands at a critical juncture," he said. "Traditional approaches to research, constrained by outdated ethical considerations, cannot provide the knowledge necessary for true advancement. Institutions like Riverside exist to pursue truth through methods that squeamish colleagues refuse to consider." The basement corridor was brightly lit now, with gas fixtures burning at full intensity. Margaret noticed that additional equipment had been installed since her clandestine visit, including monitoring devices and what appeared to be photographic apparatus for documenting procedures. The preparations for the planned mass experimentation were clearly well advanced. "The subjects you have studied in our records," Dr. Blackwood continued, "represent preliminary research leading to far more significant investigations. Next week's activities will demonstrate techniques that could revolutionize battlefield medicine, surgical practice, and our understanding of human physiology." They passed rooms that Margaret had not seen during her earlier exploration. These spaces contained elaborate experimental setups that defied her medical knowledge. Mechanical devices that seemed designed to maintain life functions while allowing unlimited access to internal organs. Chemical apparatus for introducing substances directly into bloodstreams. Electrical equipment whose purpose remained mysterious but obviously sinister. "The funding for our research comes from sources you could never imagine," Dr. Blackwood said as they approached the main surgical theater. "Military officials seeking advantages for American forces in future conflicts. Industrial leaders requiring data on worker endurance and survival. Medical institutions throughout Europe and America that lacked the freedom to pursue necessary investigations." The surgical theater had been transformed since Margaret's midnight visit. Additional operating tables had been installed, each equipped with restraints and monitoring equipment. Observation galleries had been expanded to accommodate larger audiences. The entire space now resembled an amphitheater designed for mass spectacle, rather than individual procedures. "Your timing is actually quite fortunate," Dr. Blackwood remarked as they entered the theater. "Tomorrow evening, we begin preliminary activities for next week's demonstration. You will have the opportunity to observe our methods from a unique perspective." Margaret's blood chilled as she realized the implication of his words. She and Samuel were not being taken to some secure holding area to await eventual release. They were being prepared for inclusion in the experimental program as unwilling subjects. Dr. Walsh emerged from one of the adjacent preparation rooms, carrying a tray of surgical instruments. His expression showed none of the discomfort Margaret had previously observed when he participated in questionable activities. Instead, He appeared excited by the prospect of the coming experiments. "Excellent timing, Nathaniel," Dr. Walsh said to Dr. Blackwood. "The subjects from this week's collection are responding well to preliminary treatments. We should be ready to begin group protocols on schedule." Margaret understood that subjects from this week's collection referred to people who had been kidnapped and prepared for experimentation. The casual manner in which Dr. Walsh discussed human beings as research materials revealed how completely the Academy's physicians had abandoned medical ethics. "Miss Thompson and Mr. Brooks will be joining our research program," Dr. Blackwood informed his colleague. "Their medical knowledge makes them particularly valuable for procedures requiring conscious subjects who can provide detailed descriptions of their experiences." Dr. Walsh nodded approvingly. "Splendid. We have been lacking subjects with sufficient education to articulate the subtleties of various treatments. Their participation will add significant value to our documentation." Margaret realized that her nursing training and Samuel's medical education had not only failed to protect them, but had actually increased their value as experimental subjects. Their ability to understand and describe what was being done to them would provide data that uneducated victims could not supply. The groundskeepers directed Margaret and Samuel toward a side room that had been fitted with secure holding cells. The accommodations were not uncomfortable, but the heavy bars and multiple locks made escape impossible. Each cell contained a cot, washstand, and chamber pot, suggesting that subjects might be held for extended periods before their use in experiments. "Your participation begins tomorrow evening," Dr. Blackwood announced as the cell doors clanged. "Shut. I recommend you rest well. The coming days will be quite demanding from a physical perspective." As the physicians and their assistants departed, leaving Margaret and Samuel locked in adjacent cells, the full hopelessness of their situation became apparent. Their investigation had not only failed to prevent the planned atrocities, but had delivered them directly into the hands of their tormentors. "Margaret," Samuel whispered through the bars separating their cells, "there's something I didn't tell you earlier. Something I discovered in Dr. Blackwood's private office when I was documenting the experiments." Despite their desperate circumstances, Margaret felt a spark of hope. "What did you find?" "Letters from medical officials in Washington. This program isn't just supported by unnamed benefactors. It's being coordinated by the Surgeon General's office as part of military medical research. They're planning to establish similar institutions in other territories once the techniques are proven effective." The revelation that federal medical authorities were directly involved in the Riverside experiments eliminated any remaining hope that outside intervention might save them. If the conspiracy extended to the highest levels of American medical administration, then no appeal to governmental authority would provide assistance. "There's more," Samuel continued. "The January 15th demonstration isn't just for potential funders. It's for military officials who will decide whether to expand the program nationally. If Dr. Blackwood's experiments succeed, dozens of institutions like Riverside will be established across the country." Margaret began to understand the true stakes of their situation. They were not simply facing their own deaths in service of one madman's twisted research. They were confronting the potential establishment of systematic human experimentation as official American medical policy. Throughout the night, they could hear sounds from the surgical theater that indicated intensive preparation activities, equipment being tested, supplies being organized, and most disturbing of all, the arrival of additional subjects who would participate in the preliminary experiments. Voices pleading for release, followed by the sounds of struggle and then ominous silence, suggested that resistance was being overcome through chemical or physical means. As dawn approached, Margaret realized that their only remaining hope lay in somehow disrupting the January 15th demonstration before it could convince military officials to expand the program. Even if they could not save themselves, they might be able to prevent the establishment of a network of institutions dedicated to systematic torture and murder. The question was whether two imprisoned individuals, scheduled for use as experimental subjects, could find any means of interfering with an operation that had been planned for months by individuals with unlimited resources and authority. Odds seemed impossible, but Margaret's nursing experience had taught her that desperate situations sometimes created unexpected opportunities. As footsteps approached their cells, indicating that their participation in Dr. Blackwood's research program was about to begin, Margaret steeled herself for whatever horrors lay ahead while searching for any weakness in the Academy's seemingly impregnable operation that might provide a chance for resistance. The opportunity Margaret had desperately hoped for came from an unexpected source. Dr. Morrison, the surgical specialist whose ethical concerns Samuel had mentioned, arrived at their cells just before midnight on January 14th. His face was pale with obvious distress, and his hands trembled as he unlocked their doors. "We have perhaps 20 minutes before the guards return," he whispered urgently. "I cannot live with what is planned for tomorrow. Too many innocent people will die for research that serves no legitimate medical purpose." Dr. Morrison had finally reached his breaking point after learning the full scope of the planned demonstration. The military officials arriving tomorrow expected to witness experiments that would kill at least 30 subjects while testing the limits of human endurance under various forms of torture. His conscience could no longer tolerate participation in such systematic murder. "The basement laboratory contains chemicals that could destroy the entire building," he explained as he led them through darkened corridors. "If we can reach the storage area and create the right mixture, we can eliminate all evidence of the experiments while ensuring that tomorrow's demonstration never occurs." Margaret understood that Dr. Morrison was proposing to burn down Riverside Academy with everyone inside, including themselves. The prospect of such destruction horrified her medical training, but she also recognized that conventional rescue was impossible and that allowing the program to continue would result in far greater loss of life. They reached the laboratory storage area without encountering guards. Dr. Morrison's knowledge of the building's security routines had enabled them to avoid patrols, but time was running short before their absence would be discovered. The storage room contained numerous chemicals used in experimental procedures, many of which were highly flammable or explosive when combined. "Phosphorus compounds mixed with sulfuric acid will create an unstoppable fire," Dr. Morrison explained. As he gathered materials, "The gas lines throughout the building will ensure that flames spread rapidly to every floor. No one will survive, but the alternative is worse." As they prepared the incendiary mixture, Samuel made a discovery that changed everything. Hidden behind chemical containers was a telegraph apparatus connected to external lines. Dr. Blackwood had been communicating directly with military officials and other institutions without using the town's public telegraph office. "If we can send messages before starting the fire, we might expose the conspiracy, even if we don't survive," Samuel suggested. "The evidence will reach people who can prevent similar programs from being established elsewhere." Margaret realized this represented their only chance to ensure that their deaths would serve some greater purpose. While Dr. Morrison continued preparing the chemical mixture, she and Samuel composed urgent telegrams to medical officials, newspaper editors, and government representatives throughout the country. The messages detailed the systematic human experimentation at Riverside Academy, named the military officials involved in funding the research, and provided specific evidence of the planned expansion to other territories. Each telegram included enough detail to prompt serious investigation, while being brief enough to transmit quickly. As Samuel sent the messages, explosions began echoing from the basement levels below them. Dr. Morrison's chemical mixture had ignited prematurely, and flames were already spreading through the building's lower floors. The Academy's gas heating system amplified the fire's intensity, creating an inferno that quickly became uncontrollable. "The main exit is already blocked," Dr. Morrison reported after checking the corridor. "We need to reach the upper floors and hope the fire department arrives in time to rescue us." They climbed toward the academy's top floor as smoke filled. The stairwells and heat intensified around them. The building's wooden construction made it vulnerable to rapid fire spread, and within minutes the entire structure was engulfed in flames that could be seen for miles across the prairie. Margaret's last clear memory was of breaking through a fourth-floor window onto the roof as the building collapsed beneath them. The fall should have killed them instantly, but deep snow from recent storms cushioned their impact enough that Margaret and Samuel survived with serious injuries. Dr. Morrison was not as fortunate. His body found in the wreckage days later. The fire completely destroyed Riverside Academy and killed everyone inside, including Dr. Blackwood, Dr. Walsh, and the military officials who had arrived early for the demonstration. The 67 missing students were finally accounted for when investigators found their remains in the basement laboratories, confirming the telegram's accusations about systematic murder. Margaret's messages had reached their intended recipients before the fire cut communication lines. Within days, federal investigators were examining the ruins and interviewing survivors. The evidence of government-sponsored human experimentation created a scandal that reached the highest levels of Washington political circles. Congressional hearings revealed the extent of military medical research programs that violated basic human rights. Several high-ranking officials resigned in disgrace, and legislation was passed prohibiting government funding for medical experiments on unwilling subjects. The Riverside scandal became a watershed moment in American medical ethics. Margaret recovered from her injuries, but never returned to nursing. The trauma of her experiences at Riverside Academy had permanently affected her ability to trust medical institutions. She spent her remaining years documenting the Academy's crimes and advocating for stronger protections against medical experimentation on vulnerable populations. Samuel Brooks abandoned his medical studies and became a minister like his father. His sermons frequently addressed the moral obligations of those in positions of authority and the dangers of pursuing knowledge without ethical constraints. He established a network of safe houses for people fleeing medical persecution throughout the Midwest. The site where Riverside Academy stood remained empty for decades. Local residents reported strange phenomena around the ruins, including sounds of machinery operating underground and the smell of chemicals carried on evening winds. Several attempts to rebuild on the location failed when construction workers refused to continue after discovering human remains that had somehow escaped the original excavations. In 1898, exactly 50 years after the fire, a traveling photographer documented anomalous lights emanating from the abandoned foundation. His images showed what appeared to be laboratory equipment still functioning in underground chambers that should have been destroyed by the flames. Investigators found no evidence of current activity, but local legends persisted about experiments that continued even after their creators had died. The legacy of Riverside Medical Academy extended far beyond its physical destruction. The scandal it created led to fundamental changes in American medical research regulations that persist to this day. Institutional review boards, informed consent requirements, and protection for research subjects all trace their origins to public outrage over Dr. Blackwood's experiments. However, Margaret's final writing suggested that the conspiracy behind Riverside had not been completely eliminated. Her correspondence with medical colleagues revealed evidence of similar programs operating in other locations, protected by different cover stories, but serving the same ultimate purposes: the systematic exploitation of vulnerable people for medical research had simply become more sophisticated and better hidden. Modern medical ethicists studying the Riverside case have noted disturbing parallels to contemporary research practices in developing countries and marginalized communities. The temptation to pursue knowledge through exploitation of powerless subjects remains a constant threat that requires vigilant oversight and moral courage from medical professionals. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.